Experience is not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you. We can choose which wolf we want to feed. But it's harder than it sounds, because most of us have pretty strong set points. We have these default positions that we learned long ago and that we have reinforced for many years. And choosing to respond differently takes a surprisingly big effort. I ran into a friend of mine yesterday when I was walking in the park, and she started asking me, "Oh, what are you preaching about tomorrow?" And I told her, and we got into a conversation about the sermon. And she just stopped in her tracks and said, "I could choose to respond differently." This is a very bright woman. She knows this. But somehow it hit her in a different way. She and her husband have been at loggerheads about many, many things over the course of a long marriage. And suddenly she said, "We don't have to do it the way we've always done it. We could do something different." And she seemed to have this sense of new hope. But then she stopped to think about just what hard work that would be, and how both of them would have to really, really, really want to do that hard work. And although she still had a little more hopefulness than she had before, she came back down to what she felt was a more realistic plane. I think I told you about a friend of mine who's trying very hard to change the way she thinks about herself. Many of us, if we make a mistake, what's the first thing we do? "Oh, stupid me." She always would say when she did something wrong, "Oh, I'm such an idiot." And she's trying very hard instead to say to herself, "Why, that's not like me at all." It's a huge challenge for her because she has spent her entire life feeding the wrong wolf on this issue, feeding the self-hating, never good enough wolf, saying to herself, "There you go again, can't you do anything right?" A message she received all her life. She learned it very young. But now she's choosing to work at feeding the other wolf, to treat herself gently and recognize that her mistakes are just that. They're mistakes. They don't change the fact that she's actually a very talented and competent person. She has to work at overriding her default position in order to do this. It doesn't come naturally yet, but she says it's worth it because she's cultivating a healthier self-image, one that allows her to respond to the world with greater freedom and greater generosity. She's building in herself a greater sense of pride. Now, pride is one of those things that's in the evil wolf list. But pride is a tricky subject. Pride can go either way. Pride in the form of healthy self-confidence is a very important thing. We teach our children to take pride in their accomplishments, to be proud of who they are. We talk about being proud of our heritages. Pride can be valuable and important, but there's another kind of pride, the kind that grows out of our insecurities, the pride that keeps us from admitting our weaknesses, that causes us to save face and not ask for help. Think back to the reading, Cynthia's story about her teenage training as a lifeguard. She got so caught up in her competition with those older guys who were friends of her brother that for a brief moment, she was ready to risk her life rather than admit her limitations. I could relate to that story. I bet some of you could relate to that story too. You don't have to raise your hands or nod your head or anything if you don't want to. But my default position is to feel threatened by people who are better than I am at something. Ministers hate hearing each other preach. Oh, it's agony. I heard, who was it? James Forbes from the Riverside Church in New York. Unbelievable preacher. And halfway through the sermon, I looked at a colleague of mine and we both said practically in unison, "I'm never preaching again." Because he was astonishing. I've had to work really hard to get comfortable with the idea that we each bring different gifts to the world. And if someone else's light is shining particularly brightly, that doesn't mean my light will be eclipsed. It just means there will be more light in the world, and how can that be a bad thing? Of course, if the other person is crowing about how good they are, how much better they are, it's all the harder to let them be good at that and hold on to my own gifts and strengths. It's much easier to get angry and hurt and withdraw into defensiveness. But what's the point? Basically, that attitude of superiority, reflects only on the person who holds it, not on me. That's why I'm so moved by one of the lines from an early Unitarian prayer that was written by Norbert Čapek. He was the man who initiated the flower festival service that we do every spring in Czechoslovakia in 1923. He wrote this prayer for that first service, and one line says, "May we not let awareness of another's talents discourage us or sully our relationship, but may we realize that whatever we do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to work in this world. May we not let awareness of another's talents discourage us." Amen. I need to put that on a slip of paper and put it on my bathroom mirror and read it every morning. It's a message I need to hear again and again. We all have weights that we carry, even though we know they're worthless. We all sometimes cling to that which is familiar, but not life-giving. We need to learn to drop the weights. Now, like any kind of spiritual growth or change, this is likely to be a gradual process. Some of our defensive mechanisms have served us well for a long time. They've allowed us to survive. It takes time to learn different reactions. And the first step is simply to be aware of which wolf we're feeding. Actually, let me back up. The first step is even to be aware that we have two wolves. Then to be aware of which one we're feeding. Sometimes when I get angry, my anger is serving a purpose. It's telling me that I need to confront an injustice. I don't want to ignore that kind of anger. But sometimes my anger is just eating me up for no reason. Sometimes when I judge another person, it's because that person has actually done something that I consider wrong, and I need to struggle with how to respond to that. But other times I'm just judging someone because I feel threatened by the differences between us. When I'm proud of myself, is it the healthy pride that allows me to feel good about myself in a way that lets me live a better life? Or is it that prideful ego that needs to be better than somebody else? Those are the questions I need to ask myself to figure out which wolf I'm feeding. And then the next step is to acknowledge that I can choose how I react to the events of my life. So often our default positions are so automatic that it doesn't even occur to us that we have a choice. Now, I may not be able to like what comes at me, and I get very frustrated with some of the more New Age philosophies that say, we can imagine our own world and nothing bad will be there anymore. Because bad things happen. And I'm not saying that bad things aren't real or that we can imagine them away. Bad things happen and we have to face them and struggle with them. We experience grief, we experience loss, we experience betrayal, we experience pain. These things are real. And then we decide how we're going to respond to these things in our lives. Are we going to hold on to them and nurture them and let them become the defining points of our life? Or are we going to learn how to learn from them, move through them, and set them down? Cynthia was never going to like the jeering of her fellow lifeguards. There was no way she was going to enjoy being laughed at by a group of 21-year-old guys. But she chose to accept her limitations and let them laugh. My bitter friend will never like the rejections he has faced in his life. But I still hold out hope that he'll learn to let go of some of them and focus more of his energy into all of the positive and loving people that fill his life. The choices we make can enhance our life or damage it further. A. Powell Davies was a great Unitarian minister who preached in the Washington, D.C. church in the 50s and 60s. And he wrote something that speaks to me of this struggle to feed the right wolf. And I want to let him have pretty much the last word. He said, "Let our children cultivate humility. Let our children learn that they are like other people, even the people they tend to despise. and that there is good and bad in all of us, and that each of us must make a hard struggle to bring the good out on top. Then, because of their own lost battles, they will acquire a gentle wisdom and walk softly where other people might get hurt. May we walk softly where other people or ourselves might be hurt. May we let go of the reactions that hurt us and those around us, and learn to choose a more life-giving response to the events of our lives. And may the best wolf win.